Hello, this video is about position relative and position absolute in CSS. These poker cards are created only by CSS and HTML. In the end of this video, you will be able to create cards like them. Let's start learning positions absolute and relative. I will create 3 divs, 1, 2 and 3. In the style section, I will set the margin of the body 0. I will set width of divs 500 pixels, height 200 pixels and border 2 pixels solid. I will give a different color to each div so we can distinguish between them. Divs are placed by their order in the HTML code. I will zoom the page so we can see limits between divs. Div number 2 is positioned exactly at the end of div number 1, and div number 3 is positioned exactly at the end of div number 2. By default, elements have position static. I will use inspect in Google Chrome to get dimensions of divs. The width is 504 pixels. This is width plus border. It's the same for height. I can change the style in Google Chrome. I will set position of div to static. I will add top 10 pixels. What do you think will happen? Nothing happened. Top, bottom, left and right don't affect position static. Now I will make position relative. What do you think will happen? Div 2 is 10 pixels far from its static position. With position relative, we can place an element relatively to its static position. I will add bottom 20 pixels. What do you think will happen? Nothing changed. We can't use top and bottom in the same class. When I remove top, the div will be placed 20 pixels from the bottom of its static position. I will set left 20 pixels. The div 2 moves 20 pixels to the right. I will set right 20 pixels. What do you think will happen? The div 2 moved 20 pixels to the left. I will set the margin of the body 50 pixels so we can see the left side of the div 2. Now I will try to place the div 2 next to the div 1. I will try left 505 pixels. Top is the opposite of bottom. We can use bottom or top with negative values. I will try top minus 200 pixels. Now bottom 200 pixels. Nothing is changed, they do the same work. There is a gap between the top of div 2 and the top of the page. I will set bottom 204 pixels. And there is a gap between div 1 and div 2. I will set left 504 pixels. The static position of div2 is reserved. Let's try position absolute. What you think will happen? Div3 is jumped to the position of div2. Position absolute don't reserve the static position of an element. The element with position absolute is on top of other elements. I will set left 504 pixels. Now we can see the div3. An element with position absolute is placed relatively to the position of its parent. Remember that the body is the parent of all elements. I will create 3 new divs inside the div 2. I will set width and height 50 pixels and border 2 pixels. I will zoom the page so we can see the 3 new divs. I will place my divs the same way like this poker card. I will set position of second div absolute. What you think will happen? The second and the third div are in the same position now. I will set top 0 and left 0. What you think will happen? Second div is on top left of the page. I want to place it on the top left of div 2. What I should do? I will set the position of div 2 relative. Now the second div is on top left of div 2. I will set left 100 pixels so we can distinguish between div first and div second. I will set the position of div 1 relative. But before that, I will set the margin of the body 100 pixels so we can distinguish between the top of the body and the top of the div 1. I will set the position of div 1 relative. What you think will happen? The div second is placed relatively to the position of the body and not relatively to the position of the div 1 because div 1 isn't a parent of div second. I will create a new div inside div second that help us to understand how works position absolute. I will set top and width 10 pixels and background color red. I will remove position relative from div 2 and I will set the position of the new div absolute. I will set top 0 where you think it will be placed. It's placed in the top of the page. Its position is relative to the position of the body. Now I want to place it relatively to the position of div 2. I will set the position of div 2 relative. If I set the position of the div second relative, what you think will happen? Now, the new div is placed relatively to the second div. And the second div is placed relatively to its static position. I will set the top and the left of the new div 10 pixels. I will make the position of div second absolute. What you think will happen? Now the second div is placed relatively to the position of div 2. And the new div is placed relatively to the position of div second. So, an element with position absolute is placed relatively to the position of the nearest parent with the position absolute or relative. If I said the position of div second static, what you think will happen? Now the new div is placed relatively to the div 2. Because div 2 is the nearest parent with position absolute or relative. I will change the border color of the second div. I will remove position from the new div. I will move the new div to the third div. We will see later why. Now I will try to place the second div in the middle of the div 2. I will use position absolute. I will set left 50% and top 50%. The start of div second is in the middle of div 2. But I want div second to be exactly in the middle of div 2. I will use the function calc. I will set position top 50% minus half of the height of the div second and left 50% minus half of the width of div second. I think the real dimensions are width plus border and height plus border. Now div second is exactly in the middle of the div 2. Next, I want to place div third on bottom right of the div 2. I will set bottom 0 and right 0. Finally, we will see how to rotate an element. In class third, I will add the property transform rotate z. I will set the angle of rotation 45 degrees. I will set the angle 180 degrees. I added the new div to the third div, so we can see that the div third rotate. Now you are able to create poker cards with CSS. You need to download images of heart, diamond and the other two. This is the end of this video. Until the next time, take care.